Hey guys! In today's video I bring you a shocking and revealing story. Let's meet Amara Whitlow, a teacher who died for 12 minutes and had a transformative encounter with Jesus. What he revealed destroys one of the biggest lies in history and could change everything you believe about Black people. The truth has been hidden for centuries, but now it needs to be told. So before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content like this, and activate the bell to receive all notifications. Now, get ready for an intense and surprising journey. For as long as I can remember, I have felt an invisible weight on my shoulders. It wasn't physical, nor something I could describe in exact words. It was more like a silent shadow, an ancient burden that took root in my soul without explanation. I grew up in Nova Orleans, where the streets were paved with stories of suffering and resistance. Every corner, every old house, carried invisible marks of the past: slavery, oppression, struggles for rights. But there was also music. There was faith. There was fire in the eyes of people who knew their existence was an act of resistance. My mom, Delilah Whitlow, always taught me that knowing where we came from was essential to knowing where we are going. She was a strong woman with unshakable faith and raised me between Sunday sermons and stories about our ancestors. "Never forget, Amara," she said, as she braided my hair on the porch at home. "Our people were made kings and queens before they were enslaved. No one can take that away from you." But something inside me never reconciled with the way the history of Black people was told. Something was always missing. That's why I became a history teacher. The Tulane University, one of the most prestigious institutions in Louisiana, gave me a platform to teach the truth. But the truth was not always welcome. My students loved me. They listened to me attentively when I talked about the glories of the Mali Empire, the riches of the Kingdom of Kush, the advances of Black Egypt. But my academic colleagues? They saw me as an activist disguised as a teacher. They said I was trying to politicize the story. And there was the church. Some churches in my city still preached the narrative of Curse of Cam. They said that Black people have carried a spiritual burden since biblical times, that their oppression was a consequence of the mistakes of their ancestors. I heard that and felt a silent fury grow inside me. "You're worrying too much about this, Amara," my mother said, trying to calm me down. "How can I ignore it, Mom? This justifies centuries of slavery, segregation, racism," I replied. "I know, but you won't change this alone. Maybe not alone, but I need to try." That discussion happened a few days before the incident. My mother looked at me strangely that night, as if she sensed something was about to happen, and she was right. The answer I had been looking for years was about to find me. The fatigue had been building up for months. At first, I thought it was just the weight of work. I spent hours preparing classes, researching new archaeological discoveries about African empires, debating with other academics who insisted on minimizing the grandeur of Black civilizations. But, little by little, I realized that it wasn't just stress. My body was failing. I would wake up exhausted, even after a full night's sleep. My hands shook when I held the chalk to write on the board. Climbing a flight of stairs was a challenge, something that never affected me before. "You need to see a doctor, Amara," said my friend Makeda Johnson, while we had coffee in a little bistro in the French Quarter. "I've seen it," I sighed, stirring the sugar in the coffee without any real intention of using it. "I took tests, and they all came back normal. They say there's nothing wrong with me." Makeda frowned, worried. "But you feel there is, don't you?" "Yes." I didn't know how to explain it. Something inside me was different, as if my body was preparing for something, but my mind didn't know what. That night, I went to my mother's house for dinner. The smell of jambalaya filled the kitchen, and the voice of Mahalia Jackson sang softly on the radio. The atmosphere was cozy, as always, but I felt strange, as if it were there, but at the same time, it wasn't. "You look different, Amara," my mother commented, serving my plate. "I'm just tired, oh Mom." "No, it's something more. You feel that, don't you?" I looked at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" She hesitated for a moment, then placed her hand on mine. "I think God is trying to show you something." I smiled, trying to ignore the chill that ran down my spine. But before I could respond, the world around me went dark. It was as if a switch had been turned off. One second I was there, sitting at the table, listening to my mother talk. In the next instant, everything disappeared. There was no pain. There was no warning. Just the absolute emptiness. And then, Silence. A silence so profound that it swallowed me whole. The emptiness around me was absolute. There was no sound, no form, no time, just endless darkness without any reference. I felt no fear, just a strange sense of absence, as if my very being were suspended between nothing and everything. Then, the light appeared. It was sudden, but not aggressive. It enveloped everything around me, filling the space with a warm, golden glow. The darkness was swept away like dust in the wind, and I felt something inexplicable, lightness, peace, as if a weight I had been carrying for years had been dissolved. I looked around, trying to understand where I was. The floor didn't exist, but I didn't fall. The sky was endless, but it seemed to envelop me like a hug. And then, he appeared. Jesus. He was there, in front of me. His face was familiar and at the same time indescribable. He wore a white robe made of pure light, and his eyes were the entire universe. They were deep, ancient, filled with a love so absolute that they completely disarmed me. I couldn't speak. I just watched him, feeling my soul tremble under the weight of his presence. He smiled. "Welcome, Amara." His voice was not just sound. She was mist. It vibrated inside me, as if every cell of my being responded to its call. "Where am I?" I asked, or at least I thought. Jesus took a step forward, and the light around him seemed to pulse. "In the beginning, Franzi each." At the beginning of what? He just smiled again, a smile that carried infinite patience. "At the beginning of your true understanding." I looked around. The space was vast, infinite, but it wasn't empty. I felt something beyond that light, a presence, a living truth, something that pulsed around me and within me. Did I die? For a moment, yes, but there is something you need to know before you go back. I didn't question it. There was no need. Something inside me knew that whatever he was going to tell me would change everything, and in that instant, I knew. What was about to be revealed was bigger than anything I had ever imagined. Jesus stretched out his hand, and at the same moment the space around us has transformed. The realm of light expanded and folded in on itself, revealing living images, like visions engraved in the very essence of time. We Ham, son of Noah, kneeling before his father, as he spoke words that echoed through the centuries. I saw Canaan, his son, and the generations that would come after. But what shocked me most was the colossal mistake that had been perpetuated. The curse was never on Cam. Jesus' words were firm but filled with compassion. For centuries, men have distorted the truth to justify their own cruelty. What was said about the curse of Ham was a deception, a lie used to subjugate millions. The images changed before me, saw dark-skinned men building prosperous cities, vast and powerful kingdoms. I saw Egypt building its pyramids, not as an empire of slavery, but as a beacon of knowledge and spirituality. Ham's lineage was not cursed. His voice reverberated inside me like real thunder. Cush, Mizraim, and Put, descendants of Ham, were leaders of great civilizations. They were kings, wise men and builders. They were guardians of ancestral knowledge. The revelation hit me like an electric shock. How many lives had been destroyed by this lie? How many centuries of suffering had been justified by this distorted interpretation? But then, why were we enslaved? My voice was choked. Pain shot through my chest like a sharp cut. All my life I have heard religious leaders say that black slavery was divine punishment, an inevitable consequence of the curse of Ham. But Jesus shook his head. Slavery was never my will. Those words made my legs weak. If I were still in my physical body, I would have fallen. It was the result of men's greed, of pride and cruelty. The views changed again. I saw slave ships crossing the ocean. I saw hands in chains. I saw tears being shed on the soil of strange lands. But then, I saw something else. We resistance. I saw black men and women praying out loud, singing spiritual songs that kept the flame of their faith alive. I saw enslaved people teaching their children to pray, to stand firm, to never forget who they were. And then, I understood. Even in slavery, you were never broken. Jesus looked into my soul, and that's why they tried to erase their history, because they knew that if the truth came out, the light of their people would shine brighter than any chain could ever contain. I cried. I couldn't help it, because for the first time in my life, the truth was before me, pure, without distortions. The struggle of his people was not just a social struggle, it was a spiritual battle. A battle for the world to recognize that you were never cursed. You have always been chosen. My tears fell on that land of light, and the only thing I could say was, "My God." The visions continued to unfold before me, as if I were watching history being rewritten in the very essence of the universe. But this time, the truth was not covered by lies. Jesus raised his hand, and the image of a slave ship formed in front of us. The sea was dark. The waves crashed violently against the wood while chains clinked in the darkness of the hold. The groans of pain, the whispers of prayers, the murmured songs to a God who seemed to have fallen silent, everything echoed in my soul. This was not my will. Jesus' voice carried a deep sadness, as if he felt the weight of that suffering within himself. Men used my name to justify atrocities. They took my word and twisted it to cover up their own evil, but I never abandoned them. The view changed again. Now, I saw black men and women kneeling in the fields, their calloused hands clasped in prayer. Their voices rose to the sky, singing hymns that would become spirituals eternalized in the soul of the world. I recognized those songs. My mother sang them when I was little. Songs of lament, but also of hope. Even when you were told that you had no soul, you never stopped praying. Jesus showed me leaders who emerged from the darkness. Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Martin Luther King Jr. I saw your words, your dreams, your fight for freedom, but I also saw something deeper, something I had never fully understood. They didn't just fight for social justice. They were in a spiritual war. His people's struggle was never just for physical freedom. Jesus continued. It was for the truth. I saw the first black churches being built. I saw pastors and prophets rising up among the enslaved, bringing words of hope. I saw faith being passed from generation to generation, surviving everything they tried to destroy. They wanted to erase your history, but the history was inside you. Jesus' words reverberated within me, and then I saw something that made my heart sink. The vision changed once again and took me to the present. I saw black churches in the United States being weakened. I saw young black men being turned away from their spirituality, convinced that their connection to God had been a lie imposed by colonizers. But then Jesus said, they made them believe that their faith was imposed. But the truth is that your faith has always existed. Before you even heard my name, you already knew me. My heart accelerated. What do you mean by that? Jesus approached, and his eyes seemed to contain the weight of entire eons. Before the colonizers, African people already had their connection with me. They called me by other names. They sang to me in other languages, but I was always there. My legs shook. Africa has always been a spiritual continent. The truth was distorted so that you would forget it. But the time has come to remember. A new vision emerged. I saw churches being rebuilt. I saw young black people rediscovering their faith without the guilt imposed by distorted narratives. I saw African spirituality being restored, not as something demonized, but as part of the divine plan from the beginning. We the truth coming out. And then, Jesus looked at me again. Do you understand now, Amara? Tears were streaming down my face. Yes, because for the first time in my life, I saw the faith of my people not as an imposition, but as a calling. And that call was awakening. The visions Jesus showed me still danced before my eyes, burning like fire within my soul. The history of my people did not begin with slavery. We were not just descendants of men in chains. We were heirs of kings, priests, and prophets. Jesus raised his hand, and like pages of a holy book being turned, other images emerged. We priests in ancient African temples, singing songs that reverberated throughout the universe. I saw rituals that, for centuries, were demonized by colonizers, but which were pure forms of connection with the divine. They made them believe that their faith was inferior, that their rituals were obscure, that their ancestors were lost. But this was yet another lie to make you lose your identity. My hands were shaking. I was always taught that everything outside of Western Christianity was paganism. I grew up hearing that African spiritual traditions were witchcraft, something to be avoided. But there, before Jesus, I saw the truth. African people have always had their connection with me. They knew that God was greater than what men tried to limit, but their traditions were erased, their names were replaced, and the connection they had was distorted. But I never abandoned them. The images changed again. Saw black women praying in hidden churches during the times of slavery, their voices whispered to avoid the lash. Saw African rhythms being incorporated into the praises, becoming the black spirituals that sustained the resistance of a people. Jesus then showed me something even more powerful. We Pentecost. I saw disciples being filled with the Holy Spirit, speaking languages they had never learned. And then, the vision expanded. We African men and women receiving this same spirit even before Christianity reached them. The spiritual connection of the African people has always existed. My breath caught in my throat. Before colonization, before the forced conversions, they already knew me, even without knowing my name. Jesus walked around me, and his voice was like thunder filled with compassion. Every song, every drum played, every ritualistic dance was a form of connection with me. But when they wanted to enslave their people, they knew they needed to break that connection. They needed to be told that their spirituality was wrong. My eyes filled with tears. How many generations had been taught to fear their own spiritual heritage? Jesus approached and placed his hand on my shoulder. His light enveloped me, and I felt a deep warmth fill every part of me. But the time for restoration has come. The truth is coming back. New images have emerged. We young black people reconnecting with their spiritual roots, without guilt, without fear. I saw pastors preaching a renewed message, recognizing that God was never limited to a single tradition. I saw churches and communities coming together, recovering what had been lost. And then Jesus spoke once again. The faith of your people has always been true. Now, it's time to remember. My heart was racing, and my soul burned with the certainty that something was changing. The truth was coming back, and I was part of it. Jesus was silent for a moment, as if he was giving me time to absorb everything that had been revealed. My heart was still beating fast, and my spirit trembled under the weight of the truth that now burned within me. And then, he raised his hand again. The sky opened before me. It was as if eternity itself was torn in half, revealing something that had been hidden since the beginning of time. Saw a large crowd, a united people and from all nations, but there was something unmistakable, the striking presence of black people. They were ahead, leading, shining like torches in the darkness. See, Amara, what was once distorted is being restored. My legs were shaking. I saw the truth being revealed. I saw churches once closed to the truth now accepting and acknowledging historical error. I saw schools teaching a version of history that began not with slavery, but with greatness. I saw young black men walking with their heads held high, knowing who they really were. We, the return of Jesus. The sky was full of light, and his presence descended to earth like a wave of justice and restoration. The lies that trapped entire generations, they dissolved like smoke in the wind. The truth always finds a way to emerge. Amara, no matter how much they try to silence it. My hands were clenched into fists, my chest heaved. But how? How will this happen? Jesus approached once more, and his expression softened. The truth needs to be told. He touched my heart, and I felt an inexplicable force pass through me. You will come back and share this message, but know that there will be resistance. I swallowed hard. Of course there would be. The world does not accept the truth so easily. But Jesus just smiled. Don't be afraid, I will be with you. And then, before I could say anything, I felt a sudden pull. The vision disappeared. The sky closed. And in the blink of an eye, I was back. The impact was like being sucked into a whirlwind. I left the realm of light and was cast back into my body. The first sound I heard was an insistent beep. My chest rose and fell rapidly, as if I had been pulled from the bottom of an ocean to the surface. My lungs burned. My eyes opened suddenly, and the light blinded me for an instant. "She's back," a voice exclaimed. I didn't recognize it right away, but soon my eyes adjusted. I was in a hospital. The room was white, cold, but my body was warm, as if I still carried traces of that light inside me. The surprised face of Dr. Elijah Carter appeared in my field of vision. "You were dead for 12 minutes, he said, still looking shocked. The information took a while to make sense. 12 minutes? I looked around. My mom, Delilah, was there, holding my hand tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Mother," my voice was hoarse. She squeezed my hand tighter. "My God, Amara, I thought I lost you." I could barely process the emotions around me. My heartbeat was weak, but my soul was on fire. The doctor looked at me strangely. as if trying to find a logical explanation for what had just happened. "What did you see?" he asked softly. And there, at that moment, I knew I couldn't keep that to myself. I took a deep breath and held my mother's hand. "Mom, Jesus showed me the truth." Her eyes widened. "What truth?" My voice was shaky but determined. "Cam's curse never existed. Black people have never been cursed." The silence in the room was absolute. The doctor frowned. My mother covered her mouth with her hands, as if she were facing something too big to be understood. I continued. "Jesus showed me our true story. He said that our faith has always existed, that our connection with God has always been present, and that the time has come to restore this truth." My mother cried, but it wasn't sadness. "I knew God was trying to show you something, Amara, but I never imagined something like this." Dr. Carter, still skeptical, crossed his arms. "You've been through trauma, Amara. Near-death experiences can cause—" I looked him straight in the eyes. "I know what I saw. I know what I felt." He opened his mouth to respond, but decided against it. Something in my voice, or maybe in the glow I still carried, silenced him. I didn't have all the answers at that time, but one thing was certain. My life would never be the same again. In the days following my return, I felt as if I still had one foot in the spiritual world. My body was weak, but my spirit was as strong as ever. I had died and returned with a message. Now, I needed to deliver it, but I had no idea how much resistance I would face. The first step, the week after I was discharged, Makita visited me. She always believed that the story of Black people needed to be told differently, but when she heard my story, she was silent for a long time. "This changes everything, Amara. Absent, and that's why I need to talk." Makita smiled, but her look was full of concern. "You know what's going to happen when you say that in public, right?" Of course I knew. We live in a world where truth is not always well received, especially when it challenges deeply held narratives. But I had no choice. The first attack. My first act was simple, a lecture at the university. I knew that some academics would be uncomfortable with the idea of mixing faith and history, but the truth was that these two things have always been intertwined. Religions were used to control people, to justify empires, to perpetuate oppression, and the distortion of Ham's history was one of the greatest examples of this. The room was packed. Students, teachers, curious people. When I started talking, the expressions were pure attention. But then, the first interruption came. "This is not academic. You are bringing religion into a teaching space." A professor from the European history chair shouted. I took a deep breath. "I'm bringing facts. The curse of Ham has been used as a justification for slavery for centuries. But if we analyze the scriptures in the original and compare them with historical records, we will see that this interpretation was intentionally distorted." Another academic spoke out. "You are rewriting the Bible." "No, I am restoring what was taken from her." But I wasn't just dealing with the gym. The greatest resistance would come from the churches. The conflict with Pastor Gideon Hayes. Pastor Gideon Hayes was one of the most influential voices among the city's Black religious leaders. The Sunday after my talk, he gave an incendiary sermon. "Brothers and sisters, there are wolves in sheep's clothing trying to deceive God's people. They are distorting the scriptures, trying to keep us from the truth." I knew it was for me. The next morning I received a call from a member of the congregation. "The pastor wants to talk to you." I knew I would face resistance, but I didn't expect it for the fight to start so quickly. The meeting with Hayes. That night I walked into the pastor's office. He was waiting for me, sitting behind his desk, the Bible open in front of him. He didn't smile. "Sister Amara, I heard you came back from the dead with a revelation." There was a tone of sarcasm in his voice. "I hear you've been preaching about wolves in sheep's clothing." He leaned forward. "Do you understand what you are doing? You are defying centuries of biblical teaching." I took a deep breath. "I'm not challenging the Bible. I'm challenging their interpretation of it." Hayes stared at me for a long time. "Black people survived because they had faith, because he believed in the Bible. Now you want to say we were deceived? I want to say we were manipulated, that our history was distorted so that we accepted our pain as destiny." He slammed his hand on the table. "You're messing with something dangerous, Amara. People don't like having their beliefs questioned." I held on tight to the chair. Maybe it's time to ask if our faith is based on God or what we've been made to believe about him. The silence that followed was heavy. I knew I was treading on dangerous ground, but I also knew that I couldn't go back. I knew that when I left the Pastor Gideon Hayes, There would be no turning back. My life would never be the same again. The revelation I received was not just an uncomfortable truth, it was a dangerous truth. And, like every truth that threatens established structures, it would be fought. Over the next few days, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. I received messages of support and encouragement, but also threats and insults. You want to destroy the faith of Black people. This is heresy, you need to shut up. Jesus never told you that. It was the devil. At first, I tried to ignore it. But then, one day, my mother answered one of the calls. She didn't tell me what she heard, but I noticed the tremor in her hands. That's when I realized that he could no longer avoid the confrontation. Yet for every attack, there was someone who looked for me saying that he also felt something was wrong for a long time. Young people who grew up hearing that the pain of Black people was God's will, but they never accepted this explanation. Makita and I started a movement. We create a space where historians, theologians, community leaders, and anyone searching for truth could come together. And little by little, the seed of truth began to spread. But I knew that wouldn't be enough. I needed to go public. I was invited to an event about racial justice and spirituality in Atlanta. It would be my chance to speak to the entire country. The auditorium was packed. I looked at the audience and saw faces of all ages, all colors, waiting to hear what I had to say. I took a deep breath and started. For centuries, we have been told that we are cursed, that slavery was our destiny, that our pain was predestined by God. The audience was completely silent, but I died, and I saw the truth with my own eyes. There was a buzz. People adjusted themselves in their chairs. Some whispered, Jesus showed me that we were never cursed. And then, I told everything. He said our connection with God has always been there, that our ancestors already worshipped him before they even heard his name, that our spirituality has been distorted so that we accept oppression. But the truth is coming back. I looked at the crowd. Some people were crying. Others nodded vigorously. But at the back of the auditorium, I saw a group of men frowning, whispering among themselves. The guardians of the lie were there, and they knew something was changing. When I finished, a young Black man stood up and shouted, "Does this mean we were never inferior?" I smiled. "This means we have always been chosen." The audience exploded in applause, and I knew that the truth was finally being heard. In the following days, my life became a battlefield. I was attacked in the media. Pastors and religious leaders went on television to say that I was a false prophet, one threat to the Christian faith. My email inbox was flooded with hate messages. Some threats were so serious that the university advised me to hire security. But something surprising happened. Religious leaders began to change their minds. Some pastors began to reevaluate their teachings. Churches began to debate what was previously taboo. Historians began to revisit old documents. The seed of truth was planted, and resistance only proved how much this truth needed to be told. One night, I received an unexpected message. Pastor Gideon Hayes wanted to meet me. We met at your church. He was sitting at the altar, looking at the cross above the pulpit. "You're causing an earthquake, Amara. The truth always does that." He laughed, but not mockingly, of tiredness. "What if you're wrong?" I looked into his eyes. "What if we've been wrong for centuries?" The silence between us was dense. Then, to my surprise, he let out a heavy sigh. "I have been praying about this, and for the first time in my life, I'm starting to think that maybe..." He hesitated. "Maybe we were fooled too." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "You know you can't turn a blind eye to this anymore, Pastor." He rubbed his face with his hands. "If I accept this truth, I will have to admit that I have spent my entire life teaching a lie." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "Or you can admit that you have spent your entire life searching for the truth, and have finally found it." His eyes were teary as he nodded. It was there that I realized that the revolution was just beginning. My journey is not over yet. In fact, she is just getting started. I know there will be more resistance. I know they will try to silence this truth, but now I know something that can no longer be denied. The truth always finds a way to shine, no matter how much they try to erase it. And this truth now belongs to the world. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.